Chance, thanks for joining us. This is our Throwback Thursday, but we're not throwing it back. What are we doing?
We are throwing it forward this Thursday.
So explain a little bit about what Throwback Thursday throwing forward is.
So we have been throwing back on Thursday to historic events, artifacts, things that we have in our museum's collection, but we wanted to focus this Thursday on what we are collecting for the future. So items that we don't yet have, but will help us in the future tell stories about the history of this place.
So you and I have many conversations about we do have to collect for the future because there'll be people who come after us who will then look to our collection to tell stories. We want to talk a little bit about what it means to build a collection for the Onslow County Museum first. So when we talk about the museum collects, what does that mean?
So the museum collects a lot of different types of items. Artifacts surely are what people think of when they go to a museum and you see it in an exhibit, but we also collect information. We're collecting stories, we're collecting photographs, we're collecting documents. Some of those stories are oral histories, they're not necessarily written down. And all of those help us inform an interpretation of what it is we're trying to tell people, the story that we're trying to tell them.
So how does what the museum collects differ from the salt and pepper shakers that somebody's grandma collects, or the pennies that we collect, or any collection that we all have? How does the museum's collection differ from intention and in scope?
So a personal collection a lot of times is based on one type of item. The museum collects with a more mission-driven purpose, so we might have one of those items, but that item is then represented in the museum's collection. So we might not have a large collection of pennies, for instance, or a large collection of salt and pepper shakers, but we might have a set of salt and pepper shakers that is significant to the history of Onslow County, maybe used by someone who lived here or created here in Onslow County. So those items are items that are representative of a larger collection, but we don't need that whole collection in the museum's collecting space.
So when we say that we don't need them, I mean, is it because those things have less value, or is it about the meaning? And talk a little bit about the museum's criteria when we do select something.
Certainly. So those items have value specifically to the people that are collecting those items. So for us, the value we see is in how it represents Onslow's history. And so we want to make sure that we're collecting items that are going to help us tell a story later. So for instance, we might collect one chair that was owned or perhaps created by an artisan here in Onslow County. And that helps us tell that story of that particular craftsman, that artisan who may have created that chair. But then that particular story is represented. So we don't need more chairs. We try to have a broad collection, so many different items to help us tell many different stories. Where if we used the space, which is limited, to collect a bunch of chairs, for instance, larger items, we wouldn't be able to store other things that might be of value to the story of Onslow County.
Now, specifically, we're looking at collecting items right now in the moment. You talked about throwing it forward and collecting for the future. Why is it so important to collect things now in these moments?
So certainly we're living through a very significant historical event, several actually, if you think about the pandemic, the Black Lives Matter protests, the protests to reopen the economy due to the pandemic. All of these events are generating items, they're generating stories, they're generating things that we can collect today to use to tell a story about this in 50 or 100 or 150 years from now. The same way we told the story of the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. We used items collected to tell that story. So we want to make sure that we are taking a good representative sampling of items, masks, social distancing stickers, things that we have that are going to help us tell these stories. These are items that hopefully we can collect from people around us in the county, things that they've created, whether it's a homemade mask or a sign for a protest. And then in 100 years from now, those items will be used to tell stories.
As you're thinking about and you're amassing these lists of things that we're looking for and we're making this appeal to our citizens, We also want to remind people that in the moment we are not open, but we're also creating some special protocols for when we can accept these things. Talk a little bit about the efforts that we've made to ensure that when people do bring artifacts to the museum, we'll be prepared for them, and we're going to do so in a safe environment.
Certainly. So we'd like people to certainly call ahead so we can make an appointment, schedule a time for you to bring items to us. And we've set up a space in our workshop where items can be placed for quarantine. They can be dropped off there, paperwork can be filled out there, and then we don't have to interact too closely with people. Those items can sit, and then we can pick them up later.
And if people want to reach out to you to know more about our throwing it forward, throwing it backward, how to donate artifacts, or questions that they might have about specific collections, how can they reach you?
We can always accept a phone call, so you can call us at 910-324-5008, and we are always available via email and on our website. Our website has a lot of resources and links you can click to find ways to contact us, or ways to find forms that you can fill out in order to donate things.
Well, thank you so much for sharing about collecting. As we kind of close out our conversation, what would you remind people about the importance of collecting for today, for tomorrow?
I think the most important thing to think of is how to care for those objects, to make sure that they're not going to deteriorate. Storing them somewhere that is safe. It's going to be temperature and humidity stabilized, and it's going to be not exposed to light. Making sure that those things are going to be there for the future.
Well, thanks again so much, and we look forward to our next Throwing It Backward.